Welcome to episode 7 of West Coast Biased. I am Andrew Nemec, joined as always by Jason Sukanik. Suk, how you doing, man?
What's going on, brother? Sorry, you're getting full McAfee today. It's like 100 degrees, and my air conditioner kind of went kaput, and I'm coming back from the gym.
No.
So bear with me. If you're watching this, you're getting full McAfee. I promise it won't be like this at all times. But I figured it's working for that guy. What the hell? We'll give this a crack.
There couldn't be much of a bigger contrast between the two of us. I am not wearing a hat today. I've got my hair kind of swooped. I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt polo because, yes, it is very hot. And you are guns a-blazing and a baseball cap on.
Yeah, like I said, I just got back, so I was a little gross, a little sweaty, and I was like, I'm not changing. We're going from here.
So this is a little bit of a grab bag episode in the sense that we've got a listener email that we want to get to right off the top. The AP Top 25 came out in college football. Preseason reactions, and there's been a couple of really big injuries that I think could dictate a lot down the road. And then just going around the horn on some of the storylines, we'll see how much we get to because we've gotten a lot of feedback about things people would like us to get into or talk about that go around the league. So because of that, this is a very around the horn episode. But we do start with a listener question from Ryan Wheatley pertaining to the Oregon Ducks and Washington Huskies. He writes, at what point does Washington cease to be Oregon's main rival? A national championship? More rivalry wins? It feels like Ohio State is starting to become the next big rival for the Ducks. That is part one. There's a two-parter. What say you of the Oregon-Washington rivalry?
I'm guessing that's from a Duck fan, and that's adorable. Really? We're at the point where we're dismissing Washington. Do we not forget that 2 years ago, when Oregon supposedly was going to win a national championship, the one team that you couldn't beat twice was Washington?
Right.
I seem to remember them getting you up at their place, and then the rematch in the title game, and everyone said that Oregon was going to roll them. I thought Oregon was going to win that game too. I don't know if I thought they were going to roll them, but they were, I want to say, if I remember correctly, they were like 9-10 point favorites.
Yes, they ended up being favored by almost double digits.
Yeah,
yes.
It wasn't like people were like, oh yeah, like this is going to be close. And last time I checked, they got you again. So, Washington goes through a horrible thing last year where, you lose DeBoer, you lose your basically anyone that was any good goes to the NFL or hits the transfer portal. I think you had like 2 starters returning, and it was a down year. And so now, like, you're done with that rival. I mean, that's silly. Like, Oregon has spent the last 25 years building themselves up into, if you want to say Clemson, if you want to say Virginia Tech and maybe Oregon, the only 3 programs over the last 30 years that have built themselves into blue bloods, and Virginia Tech has fallen off. Clemson won a national title in the 80s, so maybe they were more of a resurgence, but give Oregon credit. They've spent, 30 years building, and it's not in question. It's a top 10 program in the country. I don't know if it's quite a top 5 yet. Maybe it will be, but Oregon has done everything but win a national championship, right? They've played for 2 of them. The number 1 team in the country last year. They recruit now at a historic level for them, and they've built a program for a lot of these kids that is the dream program. So give Oregon credit, but let's not act like Washington all of a sudden is just some irrelevant program. I mean, that's foolish. Washington was Oregon before Oregon. And I do think the way the NIL and all that is playing out, I don't know if Washington ever gets back to what they were, but Washington's a good program that, again, 2 years ago played for a national championship.
Right.
So
kept you from the playoff.
And kept you from the playoff. So this idea that, and let's see what happens with year 2 under Jed Fish. And people were like, well, Washington can't keep a coach. Neither can you. Are we not forgetting Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich, Willie Taggart, Mario Cristobal, to Dan Lanning? And we'd like to think that Lanning's there, but I hear Oregon fan take shots like, oh, UW, you couldn't keep your coach. And now Jed Fish is going to leave. Hey, Kettle, you're black. Like, what are we doing? So it's just, to me, that's a silly argument. Is Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State, now that you're in the Big Ten, will there be new natural rivals that pop up? Absolutely. And is Ohio State more in line with where Oregon views themselves right now as a top, 5, 6, 7, 8 program? Sure. But the idea that the vitriol, the hatred that exists between Oregon and Washington fan, no, rivals aren't just because, that you have the 2 big boys on the block. There's a lot of rivals. Auburn and Alabama Auburn is nowhere near the program that Alabama is, even though, Auburn won a national title with Cam Newton not too long ago. But, to say that LSU or Texas or someone Michigan, who kept Alabama from winning a national title 2 years ago, when I thought Alabama probably should have won that game and won a national title. To say that Ohio State or to say that Texas is their biggest rival now and not Auburn, I mean, come on. So
I think the question is really indicative of where a lot of Oregon fans think they are.
Yeah.
They're recruiting like a top 5 recruiter. They are landing transfer talent like a number 1 or number 2. They're beating Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State in the combined recruiting and transfer portal rankings. So there tends to be this feeling with a fan base like that we're further along than we really are. And the truth is, Oregon still has a way to go. And you want your rival. Part of a rivalry is that the team you consider your rival, they also don't like you and consider you a hurdle. Ohio State does not see Oregon as a hurdle. In recruiting, sure. Ohio State has 9 national championships in football. 9. So even if Oregon were to win 3 this decade, Ohio State would still be like, cool, guys, and you guys are really good now. Our program is a lot more storied than you. Let's compare first round picks. Let's compare, it's not the same. And I do think Oregon fan generally has a tendency to move themselves further ahead. So far, Oregon's coaches have largely viewed Oregon as a stepping stone program. We are a year or two removed from thinking that. And remember, last offseason, there was a little bit of buzz that Dan Lanning could leave for the NFL. Yeah. And even it was tiny rumor. It wasn't even full-on interviews. Oregon fan was starting to worry a little bit. Could Dan Lanning jump? And that was always silly. But really, who you are is who you are in uncomfortable moments. And Oregon, when it got to the offseason, was again a little worried about Dan Lanning leaving. They got to the big one in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. They absolutely waxed you. It was not close. The other thing is this Oregon-Washington rivalry goes back a long way. And that's the other thing people need to understand, even beyond the Penix and Bo Nix stuff, even beyond, where it's been the last 20 years. The rivalry has gone on for almost 100 years. And where the hatred actually started from, I don't know if everybody knows this, it actually started in 1948. That's when the rivalry really started to pick up steam. And the reason was that Oregon and Cal tied for the Pacific Coast Conference Championship when Oregon had Norm Van Brocklin. Throughout history of the Pacific Coast Conference, they voted as a block. There were 8 teams. There were 4 California teams and 4 non-California teams. Montana was actually a part of that. And it was generally accepted that in a tiebreaker situation, the northern teams, the non-California teams, voted as a block, and the southern teams, the California teams, voted as a block. Oregon and Cal tied, and it went to a vote. Oregon had beaten Washington that year. It was a close game. It was a battle. Oregon had a half-game lead in the overall standings and offered to play Cal for a right to go to a Rose Bowl. Oregon hadn't had a winning season in more than a decade, so it was a huge deal for them in 1948. Cal refused to play that game. We refused to play a tiebreaker. And then Washington, when it came to vote, not only didn't vote for Oregon, they stumped for Cal and got Montana to vote for Cal. And so Oregon's block, and they thought, and the reason Oregon offered that in part was, we're going to split votes. It's going to go 4-4, and then we're stuck, and we have to play this game anyway. And Cal knowingly went, no, we'll go to a vote. And Washington betrayed a kind of agreement that they had, a pact that they had. And there are a lot of old Oregon fans. I mean, they're not even alive anymore. But when you started going to games in the 80s, like my dad's been going to Oregon games and Oregon State games for years. When he first started going to Oregon games in the late 70s, early 80s, there were old Duck fans who talked about Washington actually started this in 1948 with Norm Van Brocklin as our quarterback. So when we talk about Penix and Nix, I think that's important. It's also important to remember that part of rivalries is going back throughout history and having a top 10 biggest games. When did you betray us? Oh, when did you get, remember when that player threw a punch in this game and got thrown out and it turned the game? Those moments all lead to a rivalry. Oregon doesn't have those with Ohio State at all. They don't have any of them. Oregon loves that CJ Verdell housed one in the big house at Ohio State, and they ran for a touchdown and won that game. Oregon loves that they beat them in the regular season barely, then got, slapped in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But those aren't memorable games for Ohio State. Ohio State doesn't care that they beat Oregon in the Rose Bowl bad. They expected to. So that's a one-way street. This Oregon-Washington thing goes back a real long way.
Well,
Just ask Norm Van Brocklin.
Well, I grew up in this area, and I have family that played in the Pac-10 back when it was there, and growing up, trust me, and splitting time, I grew up, some in Oregon, some in Washington. So I live in Washington. I work in Oregon. All my friends, whether they're a Husky or a Duck, I'm like the double agent. I'm like I do. I'm wearing a Portland hat right now. I love Washington. I love the state of Oregon. I love the city of Portland. I spend most of my time in the city of Portland, yet I live in Vancouver. So I think I have a unique perspective on this. And then I'll have a dog in the fight, right? I didn't go to UW, didn't go to Oregon. I have diehard friends and family that hate one and love the other. But trust me, growing up in the 80s and in the 90s, everyone hated UW because they were the bully on the block, right? I mean, before USC and the rise of Pete Carroll, UW and Steve Ettman and those teams in the 80s and into the 90s, that was the gold standard. And trust me, UW fan was obnoxious. They would let you know that they ran the show and everyone else was, bow down, right? I mean, it was UW fan was beyond obnoxious and everyone hated them, right? Everybody. And I hate to tell Oregon fan this, but you're now the UW fan. I always laugh because every time an Oregon fan gets all bent out of shape about UW or vice versa, I'm like, you're the same fan. It's the exact same thing. It's just that Oregon has supplanted Washington as the big dog on the West Coast. And all the things that made you hate UW are you. Best facilities, best stadium. You know how many times growing up I had to hear, and by the way, I've played it. I never got to play in Autzen. I played in Husky Stadium a couple times. You know how many times I had to hear, Husky Stadium, toughest place to play in the country. We're not the biggest, but we're the loudest and best, and Mont Lake, and believe me, the sailboating, it's an amazing venue up there. And I had to hear, and you hear from people that there was nothing like it. And what do you hear now from Oregon? 60,000, but no one's louder, and best game day environment. And it's the same thing.
It is.
You're the same person. So it's the Spider-Man meme. You're just pointing at each other. You're like, it's the same thing. So that, again, to me is why this is now in regards to Oregon State is no longer Oregon's primary rival.
No.
And I think Washington State, to some extent, is no longer the Washington's main rival. And some of that is those teams are just, over the years, it's been lopsided. And now with being left behind in the Pac, 2, soon to be Pac-12 versus the Big Ten, that gap's going to grow and grow. But Washington and Oregon is going to stay, especially if Washington or Jedd Fisch gets his feet underneath him. And this is a competitive series going forward. No offense to Ohio State, no offense to Penn State. The biggest rival and the biggest hatred and the biggest vitriol will be, and what, proximity breeds it too. The fact that Oregon and Washington are a couple hours away. And if you live in Vancouver, I have a buddy of mine who's a diehard Husky, and he hates more than anything else, because he's a Vancouver guy. He hates more than anything else when he sees that driving around Vancouver. And if you don't know, Vancouver is basically a suburb of Portland just across the river. He freaking hates it. He hates it when I wear a Portland gear. He can't stand it. He's like, this is Washington.
You're in the wrong state.
You're in the wrong state. And that's going to be there. And so I just don't see any possible way, with the exception of the Washington Husky program falling into a damn crater, going pitfall. I just don't see a time when Oregon and Washington isn't the most hated game on the schedule, isn't the bitter rival. And they're going to play each other every year. And Ohio State and Oregon aren't going to play every year, unless you're talking about, playoffs and all that. But no, the Washington Oregon thing, it's been around a long time and has really been heated, let's say for at least the last 35 years.
When 1948.
When it used to be, it wasn't a rival. Because Washington won every single year. And then Oregon flipped the script, and Oregon became the big brother. And it was like, yeah, that's cute. And then Jake Browning in the point game and hung 72 on him. And all of a sudden it was like, we got a little something here. And then we had some back and forth. And then we had Bo Nix and we had Kalen DeBoer. And we're like, and now, there's something. And we've talked about it. I really think Washington's going to be pretty good this year.
I do too.
And if Oregon has a loss or two, and we'll see what happens. But that last game of the year, Oregon-Washington, I don't think Washington's a playoff team. That game may be an elimination game for Oregon. If Oregon's sitting there with one loss, let's say to Penn State, or, God forbid, like they trip up somewhere along the way and they've got 2 losses, then that last game against Washington at UW, let's say Washington's an 8-9 win team and Oregon's a 1 or 2 loss team, and you're going into Seattle into November, and that's for your playoff life, whether it really means anything for Washington or not. Sorry, that's why that rivalry will always be bigger to me. In my view, that will always be bigger than what's happening with Ohio State down the road. You're going to have a lot of these years where Ohio State and you battle for the right to play for a national title before you come close to having what Oregon and Washington's going to have.
Part 2, has Dan Lanning already surpassed, so you were right, it is a Duck fan. Has Dan Lanning already surpassed Chip Kelly as the best coach in Oregon football history?
Oh my God. What is the Oregon fan wanting to they want to jump steps? And I don't even think Chip Kelly's the best coach in Oregon.
I don't
history.
either. So that's what I was going to, that was my big caveat is I don't think Chip is. He's got the best win-loss record.
Yeah.
I even think it's tough. I think it's Mike Bellotti, by the way.
Yes, it is Mike.
The
Bellotti.
hardest thing to do is not to go from 8 wins to 10 wins. The hardest thing is to take a program that's perennially, and that's when they play 11 games. So 4-7. Back then they didn't play 12, and go 3-8. And suddenly you're a perennial 8, 9, 10 win team. Yeah. Mike Bellotti is the number 1 coach for Oregon all time. He is. Yes. And he doesn't get enough credit, and he deserves infinitely more credit than he gets. Chip Kelly is a wonderful 4-year story who picked up a program that was right on the precipice of being incredible
and ran with it.
Yeah. But he left.
Yeah.
He left quickly. And he won big games. Now in terms of this topic, I think Dan Lanning is also still below Chip Kelly. And the biggest reason is Oregon's gone into their biggest games. Georgia in his first one, not real fair, but let's face it, it was a big game. Yeah. The Ohio State Rose Bowl, he got bailed out because they got Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl. That was an Oregon team that was actually ripe for getting beat bad because right at the end of that year, a couple teams that were supposed to be in the national title game lost. And Oregon's choices, and not choices, but the teams they were potentially going to play in a big bowl game were either Liberty or teams that had previously been in the top 3 nationally in a year where Oregon wasn't really probably a top 3 team nationally. They could have had a loss there if instead you played an Alabama, you played a Michigan or an Ohio State in a side bowl in another one of the big bowls, but just not the Fiesta Bowl. We could be going into this year saying outside of the Big Ten title game against Penn State, Dan Lanning's never won the big one and never even won really a big one. Now they won at home in the regular season against Ohio State. Regular season wins to me generally aren't your big ones. Yes, there are some big games there, but you need to win big bowl games. You need to win college football playoff games. And to me, the biggest gap between Lanning and Chip is when Oregon had Chip, teams were afraid of him, legitimately afraid of him. They beat the brakes off Florida State. They beat the brakes off Florida State in the Rose Bowl game. And God, who was it? The head coach at the time that they played next? They played Auburn. So was it Gus Malzahn was the coach then?
Gus was the coach when Auburn won the national title.
He asked in his press conference after.
No, it wasn't Gus Malzahn. Sorry, it was Gene Chizik. Gus was the offensive coordinator. Yes, okay. But Gene Chizik cost a lot to be great. It was Gene that was the head coach.
Okay, so they asked. He asked in that press conference, how'd the Oregon Florida State game go? Because remember, he had his own game, and they said Oregon beat him and said the score, and he was like, "Oh man, oh boy, they're good." There was fear of Oregon. There's not really fear of Oregon right now, and instilling that fear in your opponents is the area that Dan Lanning still needs to get to. People don't fear Oregon. In Oregon's big games that they've lost, and you pointed this out perfectly a couple weeks ago, Oregon's given up more than 32, 34 points a game in their losses. Their defense gets steamrolled in big games, and their margin of not defeat is quite high in their losses. So I don't totally buy this Dan Lanning has surpassed Chip. Now, there's potential there, no doubt. And if I were a betting man, because Chip's run is over and Dan Lanning still clearly has runway, I would say in the end, Oregon fan likes Dan Lanning and has Dan Lanning higher than Chip, because all it's really going to take is a couple more years because Chip's run was so short. But Mike Bellotti's the best coach in Oregon history. And to be honest, I'm not sure it's that close.
No, No, I mean, that's just again, like I'm not Oregon fan. I love you, but this is just again, it's recency. I know it's exciting and the recruits, and in 5 years, maybe Dan Lanning wins a national championship, and this is a silly conversation, but come on, dude, it's 4 years. This is his fourth year, and he's got a Big Ten title and a bad loss in the playoff to Ohio State. So Mike Bellotti built this thing kind of from the ground up. I mean, Rich Brooks, obviously, but that's like saying if like Caleb DeBoer had won a national title, was he the best coach in Washington history? I give some credit to the people that they came from,
Right.
that actually kind of built the program. So you got a while to go. Sounds like Lanning isn't going anywhere. So maybe in a couple years we're having a different conversation here, but no one thought Chip was going to leave after 4 years. No one thought Cristobal was going to leave after a couple. Weird things happen, so never say never in the world of college football, but enjoy it. Why you just think we're always worrying about tomorrow and like what's coming down the road. Just enjoy what you have right now. And I think what you have right now is one of the hottest names in college football, and he's exciting, and the kids love him, and it's a national program. So just enjoy it and don't worry about who's quote the best and all that. Just take care of business, start, stacking wins, start stacking Big Ten titles, maybe get over the hump in one of these and kind of see where it goes from there.
I will say this though. I do think there's a place if you're looking with a pro Lanning lens, and we talk infinity stones, right? In college football, and you have winning record, you have you're recruiting, you have it kind of invigorating the boosters, right? And the season ticket holders. If you start connecting all those infinity stones, I do think, and then connecting with the old guard, getting the Joey Harringtons of the world to say this is headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
Dan Lanning has all the infinity stones.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have the gauntlet until you win a title, right? At Oregon, that's the expectation. Yeah. But if we're talking about the different pathways you have to succeed in to be a complete coach, Dan Lanning seems to have all of them, except maybe X's and O's game prep in the biggest games, because they've gotten waxed in those games.
Yeah.
But, Bellotti wasn't a great recruiter, and he did some great things and he identified talent, but he wasn't a great recruiter. Chip Kelly was kind of a jerk to a lot of people, and he turned people off somewhat, and he didn't know how to hire a defensive staff. He didn't really care about that side of the ball. See Lincoln Riley beta version. That's Chip. Dan Lanning seems to have all the pieces. And I think if we're talking about a coach who could be the most complete coach, it could be Dan Lanning. We're just not there yet. But I do get the idea that,
sure,
hey, this guy has every tool at his disposal. He's a motivator. He's a recruiter. The boosters love him. The kids love him. He recruits. All of it's good.
UW would have said the same thing about Kalen DeBoer, and USC would have said the same thing about Lincoln Riley when he got there, though.
But I don't know if they would have, because Kalen DeBoer had trouble with recruiting. Caleb DeBoer couldn't really recruit. Now, that wasn't his fault. Look what he's doing at Alabama.
Yeah,
that was actually more, they didn't know how to. Washington was a little behind in NIL. Same thing with USC, a little behind in NIL. But yeah, Lincoln Riley was hyped just having all the infinity stones too. And look where we're at, where we're like, he's only got one or two of those bad boys.
Yeah, it's a big year for him. I just, in the world of college football, it's so what would you say, turbulent, right?
Yes,
and
yeah.
we love to crown, we love to anoint, and I just, I think about it like I know we'll talk about some preseason NFL here in a bit, but it's like we love to take one thing and then try to extrapolate out for, oh, well, he looked great in this game, therefore he's going to be XYZ, and he's eventually he's got to win a national title. Look at what he's doing. Well,
it's inevitable.
It's inevitable. Nothing is inevitable except death and taxes. So, I tend to be more of a realist and a grounded guy, and I can get excited. And I'll just say that if I'm an Oregon fan, I'm very excited with the way the program is going. I've been covering this team now for 23 years. My station that I do my show on is home of the Ducks. I'm not a homer. 1051 the fan. Tune in 3 to 7. So I'm not a homer by any stretch of the means. It's one of the things I try to pride myself on is I try to take a Trent Dilfer 30,000 foot view at this thing. And sometimes Duck fan gets mad at me. They're like, "Oh, you hate the Ducks." I'm like, "Oh my God!" Like, because I don't drink the Kool-Aid and I won't kiss someone's ass. It doesn't mean I don't hate the program. I just just be patient. But I'll say this: in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, the excitement and the buzz about where it's going is as high as it's ever been. And so I get it. I get the excitement. I just hope that some of the other programs around it also rise up. Cause I think, I mean, obviously this show is called West Coast Biased. And, when USC and UW are good, and I think they're going to be good, I think it makes it that much better. I think, I know Oregon fan wants everyone to be terrible but Oregon, but just as a college football fan, I don't. I want to see those rivals. I want to see West Coast football not just be Oregon and everyone else. I want to see it elevated, and I'd like to see Jed Fish stick around and do great things, and I'd like to see Lincoln Riley pull his head out of his ass and learn how to coach in close games and actually build a real recruiting class. It looks like they have that, and if you do that, now I think it's going to be fun if we get some of these coaches that stick around and we get some real rivalries built, and we get Lanning versus Fish versus Riley, year after year after year, and then you throw in the Ohio States and the Penn States. I mean, we could be entering a golden age of Big Ten football here with a couple of the West Coast guys thrown in for it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Pivoting to some NFL storylines of the preseason, week one, some key injuries, some big performances. I did a little snippet on this, but I wanted to get your take. Shedeur Sanders, fifth round pick. A lot of people really excited about it. I do want to put in the caveat that the Giants very, very openly ran a victory lap after Daniel Jones' first start, and they were like, we proved everyone wrong. It's funny because the Eagles are not doing the same thing with Tanner McKee, who had a much better day than Shedeur. It's funny that Shedeur is getting a ton of credit and deserves it. It was a good performance, but
it was.
Snoop Huntley actually had a higher quarterback rating for the game. The guy that came in after him and has only been playing with them for a few days. That being said,
well, Ben Woolridge, if you want to look at like Ben Woolridge, if you don't know who Ben Woolridge is, he's a guy that started for the Patriots. Dude went 9-12 for 132, a touchdown at a 138 quarterback rating.
Right.
Dude, we can go through, we can find 10 guys that look really good in the preseason in their action. And one of those guys is Shedeur Sanders. But he's one of those guys. No one's saying that Ben Woolridge, you mentioned Tanner McKee. And by the way, Tanner McKee may end up being a Matt Schaub figure.
I liked him at Stanford.
Yes, dude. If I'm an NFL team right now and I have a quarterback injury, and you're going to tell me that it's a third round pick to go get Tanner McKee, I'll take a third round flyer. Like you take a third round flyer on Dylan Gabriel. I'll tell you right now, I got to give up a third to go get Dylan Gabriel. I think he went in the third, if I'm not mistaken. Or I give up a third to go get Tanner McKee. I know where I'm going. I'll take Tanner McKee, but it's one game. So can we just give credit, but a deep breath? So I watched the Shedeur Sanders game, and I think there was a lot to like. He's become this weird Tim Tebow polarized figure where
you have to love him or hate him.
Yeah. And we're going to use whatever sort of metric we want to own, where it's like we're Republicans, Democrats, and I'm just going to own the libs, or I'm going to own I'm going to own the elephants. Like, screw you, Trump. Like, I'm going to own you. Why? Like, just, I don't know why we have to own the other one. And I got Robert Griffin III saying that God overcame things for Shedeur Sanders. Stop it. And I got other people that spent the entire week saying the Browns were setting him up for failure, and look at him now, and Deion Sanders. What are you going to say? It's a preseason game. And by the way, 2 of those balls should have been picks. He had one that hit the guy in the chest, the first touchdown pass. Again, DB turns his head around. More than likely, that's a pick. But that's also a big time throw in the pocket. He had 2 really big time throws. He had a couple bad overthrows. He had a terrible sack where he backed up, 1,000 yards. But if we're grading it, it's a B, maybe even a B plus for what he was given, for what, the situation he was put into. There was a lot to like. And you can probably say at this point that he was probably underdrafted. But this idea that because of the idea that he somehow won a job off a preseason game against arguably the worst defense in the NFL that wasn't playing a bunch of starters, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And believe me, sports radio for 25 years, I've heard some dumb stuff, but give him credit. But that's why I said it's the Tebow thing now, where when Tebow did anything good, then I had to listen to these dip S's. I told you Tim Tebow is great. And if Tim Tebow throws a pick, that I told you he couldn't play. Just both of those arguments are dishonest. So to say that Shedeur Sanders didn't do anything to give you hope in that game, or that somehow it didn't matter because he was playing against backups and it was Carolina. It's a dishonest argument.
Right.
And to say that he is somehow the starter now in Cleveland, or that he has proven that he should have been a first round pick, or that he's holding up his watch and that's a dishonest conversation.
It was not worthy of a Nike ad. It's not worthy of a starting job. And if he has a bad game next week, that doesn't mean he's not worthy of being on the roster.
And he probably won't start. And people don't want to hear it. Joe Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback. It's just like no coach. Trust me, I went through there was preseason games where I looked good. I remember my first preseason game against the Chicago Bears, and people were like, oh, this is a Cannon kid. He may be pretty good. And then next week we played the 49ers, and guess who has never heard from again? Me.
Did you face Bryant Young or Dana Stubblefield?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was the end of it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
they'll get you.
And so, like, believe me, I've seen it. I went through a preseason game where I was like, I can do this. I can play. Wrong. Found out real quick. So no one game planned against him. Right. You're playing, and I don't, vanilla defense, whatever, but it's not specifically game planned. You're not doing anything really complex. It's just, can you pass the test? And yes, he passed the first test, and people say, I hate Shedeur Sanders. I don't hate Shedeur Sanders. I hate silly arguments, and I hate silly narratives. And this narrative that somehow the NFL has a gripe to pick, or that they all colluded to say, screw you, and we're gonna put you in your place because you're a young black male that's confident in yourself. Yeah, because that's what the NFL does. The NFL hates young black males. Clearly, can't handle a cocky black male in the NFL because we've never seen one of those. So I hate dishonest bull horse bleep arguments that are used to prove some sort of point or narrative. And that's what I push back against Shedeur Sanders. I have nothing against the kid. I have no idea. Right. Actually seems like a pretty good kid, very confident in himself. Do I love the entourage and holding up the watch in a preseason game? No, but again, I'm a 47-year-old, dad of 3. I'm probably not going to love what most 21-year-olds are out there doing, flexing on people, but give the kid credit. That's the first test. And he passed it. I'm not going to say he aced it, but he passed it, and he passed it solid. That's an 85. And now can you keep passing tests? And if you pass enough of them, then, you get your dream, and you get to start, and you get to play.
Here's my thing. We have seen in recent years what quarterbacks have hit the ground running, right? Even been better than kind of their scouting report.
Yeah.
Guys who have played a lot of football, experienced quarterbacks. I had a 3rd round grade, maybe low 2nd round grade ish on Bo Nix. I'd have to go back and look, but right in that wheelhouse. Yeah. He was taken in the 1st round. He was put in a good system. He's experienced. He knows how to read a field. He struggles early, but kind of picks it up quicker than you'd think he would. Yeah. Shedeur's scouting report is played a ton of football. All things being equal, if you can keep him clean, he's accurate. Mm-hmm. He can process. He can go through his reads well. He'll throw to the right guy. He had the highest completion percentage in the history of college football. People said a lot of that is check down. You know who else they said that about? Bo Nix. Yeah. They said it was all check down stuff. His arm's not elite. One of the big question marks was when he's pressured, he tends to back up, like in Madden, where he's suddenly 20 yards behind the play. Guess what? He did that in the game at least twice. Once he scrambled away and it was a sack of a yard. The other one was a disaster. Yeah. He was kind of what his scouting report was. Now, it was the high end of that variance, but that's roughly what he was. So I thought he played great. I thought it was really good. Nothing opened my eyes where I go, I didn't know he could make that throw. Yeah. He's got touch. He throws with touch. He reads well. Against backups, he's overqualified. Like, I had a 3rd round grade on him. I like him. He's got upside to be a, mid-tier starter at his ceiling. I also don't think there's any scenario in the world in which he's a top 6-7 quarterback in the NFL. He just doesn't really have those tools that you almost need. Like, his absolute ceiling, and a lot of guys never reach it, so I'm not comparing the two, is like a Brock Purdy, where doesn't have all the tools in the world, but maximizes everything. The only issue is Brock Purdy's actually a much better athlete. Yeah. So even at that's a steep hill to climb. So I know people want to say, he proved all the doubters wrong. And, Mel Kiper gets to do, a jig and be thrilled about the way it's going. Generally speaking, a very solid effort, but kind of who we thought he was. There was no throw. There was no play where you go, this doesn't fit the scouting report. It all kind of was what people thought it was.
I did like I said, the 2 big throws, one out of the goal line, and then the touchdown pass. Again, guy turns his head. Maybe that's different, but those are 2 those are two NFL throws. And so that's why I said, like, I thought it was very on point what you said. It was a scouting report. At this point, I think we can say that he was underdrafted, but that doesn't mean he should have been drafted 2 overall.
And by the way, if we were doing a redraft right now, you know where I'd have him? I'd have him as a 3rd round grade. Yeah. That's, that's where I had him before.
That's because you hate him and, the Dion and all this. And it's just that I hate dishonest arguments. And unfortunately, and I won't mention any names, but there's a ton of people, from people that have national shows to people that are on ESPN. And we love dishonest arguments, and we love to have agendas, and we love to pick, and we love to race bait, and we love to, it's just the whole thing is just, it's just silly. It's a silly argument. And the fact that we're sitting here and having to debate over a 5th or a 3rd round pick because of what his last name is, and that he's a flashy kid that has a bunch of money. I mean, again, this falls into more culture wars than it does actual football conversation.
It's Angel Reese for the NFL.
It's Angel Reese,
lover or hater based on other things other than our basketball play.
It's red meat for the politicized, angry, world out there, where you got a group of people that want to see someone taken down because you're cocky and whatever. And we want to see you get humbled. And the other side wants to see the cocky person come in and show the establishment that I don't have to do it your way. I don't have to play by your rules. And, that stuff, it's to me in 2025, 2026, going into this NFL season, that's just, it's just such a silly argument, dude. Whether I don't care, black, white, purple, gay, straight, if you can play in this league, you will play in this league. You just will. I mean, the NFL doesn't care where you're drafted. The NFL doesn't care if you are good enough, you will play. Lamar Jackson could come out and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and say basically whatever the hell they want. And guess what? They're starting quarterbacks in this league because they're the 3 best quarterbacks. Just is. Now, if you're a fringe player, that gets into a whole other thing. Do you want your backup quarterback to be, this is the Cam Newton thing. Cam didn't want to be a backup, and no one wanted him to be the backup, because you don't want your backup quarterback to be the guy that everyone's talking about. So there is a point of distraction and stuff like that. And this is one of those things that if I was Shedeur Sanders and his camp, they should have learned it at the draft, and they better learn it in this. If you're going to come out and you are going to be the focal point and you are going to make it about you, and I get it, you got branding and all this stuff and you want to do it, that's great. But if you're going to be the backup, or if you're going to be the 3rd string quarterback, teams don't want that. They just don't. It's one thing when you're the starter, but if you are a backup and you are a distraction, you are not going to be worth it to NFL teams. And so the best thing that anyone can do, if you aren't the guy, is just put your head down and work and let your play speak for itself. But when you're coming out and you're trying to do, gotcha stuff, and you got cameras following you around, I'm telling you, that stuff, whether it's the best one I could think of is again, Cam Newton or Tim Tebow were great examples of this, where NFL teams just weren't willing to deal with it. They're like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze for the distraction and kind of the pain in the ass that comes along with having you on this team. I don't want to deal with it. And you're not that good, so I won't. But when you're Terrell Owens, you can do sit-ups in the driveway. And, you can
spike a ball on the Dallas Cowboys star. And
when I was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there'd be days where Keyshawn Johnson just didn't show up. Like, he literally, it was like one of those things. You'd be amazed at how often this happens and we don't really talk about it. He just didn't show up to practice. And then it'd be this awkward, we've kind of he didn't show up. And it was like, oh, that's Keyshawn. Or I had days in Denver where I had veteran players that just were like, yeah, I'm not practicing today. And they wouldn't wear their helmet out at practice. And the coach is like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm wearing a hat. And they were like, well, you're not dismissed. And he goes, I don't care. I'm not wearing my helmet. And like, he would do a drill and he would like lean across to like one of the linemen, like, you touch me in the face, I'll kill you. And like, here I am as like a rookie. And I'm sitting there staring across the line at this guy that had been to the Pro Bowl multiple times and was literally a grown man. He was like 36 years old. And I'm like 21, 22. And I'm like, and the coach is like, go hit him. I'm like, no. Yeah, because he just decided, he's like, well, I'm not wearing a helmet today. Literally, this happened. I saw defensive players tell coaches to go F themselves. And you're like, can you do that? And they're like, well, he can, you can't.
Right.
But again, you can do that because of who you are. I do that, and there's a bus ticket waiting for me. from I'm heading from Tampa down to Pensacola because I just got my ass cut. And so that's one of those things to remember. And I do think one of the reasons that he fell in the draft and he was underdrafted was because of this. I think, like you said, probably realistically second, third round pick, maybe in a talent and all that. But I think people did look at him and were like, I don't think he's a starter. I don't think he has a super high ceiling to him. And I don't want to deal with this for a backup. So, I'm all right. I can take Dylan Gabriel. We think it gives kind of the same sort of vibe to it. And I don't have to deal with that crap. So I'll take him. And the fact that he has one preseason game and now this, and now you have to deal with this in the locker room. You have to deal with it with the media, and players have to get asked about this. This kind of goes into that. Be careful what you wish for, man. You want all the attention. You want all the spotlight on you. There's a lot of stuff that comes with it that you may not like, especially if the next game doesn't go so well. So it's kind of a catch-22. When you ask for the attention, be careful because you might get it.
49ers, not the most exciting preseason action. They didn't play a lot of the starters. There are a few small takeaways, but generally speaking, I did get a text from an unnamed 49er fan who also works at 105.1 who said they played terrible and I'm a little worried about the depth. The Niners a few years ago played a scrimmage against the Raiders, a joint practice against the Raiders. They looked terrible. Everyone panicked. They made the Super Bowl. I don't think we're at that place yet. The Niners have had some misses on drafts. They did trade a haul to get Trey Lance, which obviously didn't work out. So there are some depth concerns within the franchise. But really, there's not a whole lot that worries me about this. The things I was worried about before, guess what? I'm still worried about. They're really relying on defense on rookies, and they didn't address the interior of the offensive line, which everybody knows is an issue. So we'll see. What should Niner fans feel good, bad, indifferent about this first game?
Okay, first let me just say, right, Mac Jones, I 4.7, 74 yards. He had the pick, but he led a touchdown drive. They got the safety. They were up 9-0 when anyone that was going to play was going to play. And by the way, they didn't play much of anybody. Was it Corey Kiner? I think was their leading rusher with 10 carries, and then a bunch of people that you probably haven't heard of. None of your real receivers gave any sort of look. In fact, I don't think there's a guy that they're really counting on to really be in any sort of real top of the rotation that caught a pass. So what am I supposed to do with that? So I think and the 49ers have basically said that the joint practices that they're having, those are more important than this. So what do I take out of this? I mean, I wish we had some more players that were actually going to play. I wish we didn't have some of the banged up injuries that we were going to have. So if I was a 49er fan, I would take literally nothing out of this. I mean, nothing. You're banged up. You can't be banged up. You got to get healthy. And I mean, other than that, this is the year the Lions went 0-16, they won 4 preseason games. So there's teams that take the preseason seriously. There's those that don't. And this didn't really seem like the 49ers were taking this seriously at all, especially when you consider that Denver did for the most part. Denver, Bo Nix threw the ball 11 times. They kept some starters in. And again, you got up 9-0 on them. You got the safety. You had a little pressure there. I think you saw some of the young guys flash a little bit. I think you feel pretty good despite the pick. I think all reports out of camp is that Mac Jones is a good, solid backup quarterback. And you may need that because Brock Purdy does have an injury history. So I just, to me, this is more of an incomplete than anything else if you're the Niners. So I wouldn't look into the fact that after being up 9-0 in the first quarter, that then you got outscored 30-0. What you do know is that the depth of this team isn't as good as the depth on the Broncos team. And
we knew that.
You knew that. You knew this wasn't a deep team. We've talked about it so many times. The Niners need rookies to hit. And when you need rookies to hit, you're not going to have great depth, which goes back to my main point of the 49ers have to stay healthy. And so far, they have not stayed healthy. That's my biggest concern. Can you stay healthy over the long run when it doesn't seem like you can stay healthy in the preseason? So
a couple of very small takeaways. I look for development of younger guys. Their 2 highest rated offensive linemen were 2 late rookies from last year who they thought had potential if they redshirted. PFF graded their 2 best offensive linemen as those 2 guys. They need depth along the offensive line. So if those guys are developing, that's a good sign. I'm not excited, but it's something to watch. Junior Bergen, they drafted late out of Montana this year, tied the FCS record for most punt returns in a career for touchdown with 9. His very first touch was like a 28-yard, 30-yard punt return. They've gotten almost nothing out of their return game in the last few years. It's been bad. I know Isaac Garendo had a big play last year on a kickoff, but generally speaking, they have not gotten anything out of their punt return. They drafted him specifically to kind of add some spice to that punt return game. So for him to have almost a 30-yarder on his first touch is a good sign. That's probably their best return in the last couple of years. Yeah. So, okay, he flashed. But again, is that Denver's main special teams guys, or those guys playing special teams because they're trying to make the roster? Yeah. Again, other than that, not a lot to take away. I did want to touch on, we don't know the end result yet, but before we get out of here, Rashawn Slater got hurt for the Chargers. We're worried about that. They did confirm that Joe Alt is going to move over to that side. That's something we talked about on the show, that's what we thought would happen. Landon Dickerson went down and was carted off the field for the Eagles. Obviously, Jason Kelsey's retired. Their interior, if Dickerson's out for a significant amount of time, and as we're recording, there is no announcement yet.
No. Doesn't look good, though. The initial reports are bad.
Yeah, yes, it's not good. If Dickerson's out, are we starting to worry that the Eagles are one of those teams that could have that, even though they won't, even though they were great, a Super Bowl-ish hangover where the year after you're in the Super Bowl, it's just that much harder to stay healthy. Saquon, had so many miles on those legs, he could get banged up, and suddenly it snowballs, or is it way too early to worry about any of this?
Well, I mean, look, if you're asking me, does Philadelphia go on this run where, we're talking about in the same way the Kansas City Chiefs? No. Saquon Barkley does not stay healthy. And look back at people that had the mileage that he did last season. He was the best player in the NFL last year. He just was. Should have broken the all-time rushing record had they kept him in. He was the MVP of that team. You look at, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but they were 27th in passing. And Jalen Hurts did what Jalen Hurts does in the postseason, which is play inspired ball. But they're nowhere without Saquon Barkley. And a year older and a guy that has always been beat up, those mileage. And you mentioned Dickerson goes down. Lane Johnson continues to defy, all aspects of age. But again, eventually that takes its toll on you. What are you doing at right guard? And now if Dickerson ends up being out, you have 2 positions to fill there. Mailata and Juergens are both really good, but
yep.
And Dallas Goedert isn't a spring chicken. So, I mean, I just think there's a lot of the idea that everything stays healthy for an offense that wasn't as good as people think it was last year. It just wasn't. It was a good offense, but
it felt very paint by numbers. And,
yes.
And the big X factor was, okay, Saquon can break the paint by numbers and create some real art. But other than that, it felt very paint by numbers, and then Saquon explodes for one, right? I mean, that's actually who they were.
Yeah, and we know that defense from year to year can be pretty volatile. Look at the Cleveland Browns. I mean, one year you're the number 1 defense in the NFL, and the next year the 18th. And I'm not saying Philly's fallen off a cliff. The Eagles are good, and the Eagles have maybe the most complete roster from top to bottom last year in the NFL, and they won the Super Bowl because of it. But I do think that there is, if Dickerson's out, for the season. And remember, when you lose a lineman, you say the same thing about Rashawn Slater. Just because you lose a lineman doesn't mean another one doesn't go down. When you lose one this early in the season, there's a long way to go. And you start piling them up. Kansas City has lost 2 Super Bowls because of O-line injuries. It happens.
Right.
So it's like if Dickerson goes down and you're like, oh my God. Now what happens if Lane Johnson goes down at some point in the season and already, or Saquon Barkley ends up dealing with a bulging neck, or he ends up with a lingering hamstring? Again, see the San Francisco 49ers when Christian McCaffrey is dealing with a calf. Oh, be out 2 weeks. Well, it kind of end out for the whole season. And when you lose a gravitational player like that, it's a big deal. AJ Brown last year, had some issues coming out between him and his quarterback. If the offense struggles here, does AJ Brown kind of have one of those things? It's really hard to consistently just be good year after year, week after week in the NFL. And everything came together for Philadelphia last year. And by the way, they were still a play away from losing to the Rams. If Stafford can get the ball out to Higbee, they beat Philadelphia, and we're not talking about the Eagles as the Super Bowl champ. So, it's really, really hard unless you're the Kansas City Chiefs who I just give the benefit of the doubt because they have Mahomes and they're in the AFC title game every single year. It's just really hard to kind of keep this rolling. And you start losing players like Dickerson this early in the season, or Slater in with the Chargers, who have proven nothing. Those are really big injuries to overcome, because one or two linemen absolutely can change the fate of your whole season. We talk about quarterbacks, talk about running backs, but you start losing linemen and really anchor positions, and it really can change an entire offense. You know, when Steve Hutchinson left Seattle, the run game was never the same. When you get a left tackle that you don't have to worry about, and all of a sudden he goes down, and now all the protections have to shift. And the best pass rusher now needs to be double teamed. So not only are you having to replace a left tackle, but now you're taking away a double team from somewhere else, because now you have to put it on the left side, and that makes your right tackle, your right guard more vulnerable. And it's like this domino effect.
Yep.
And so these are O-line injuries are the least talked about, but I think some of the biggest impact that happened in the NFL. So really crappy news with the Chargers, and potentially crappy news out of the Eagles, because again, interior linemen, when it talks about a quarterback that doesn't handle pressure well, pressure up the middle, and then in the run game where they've been so dominant, those interior guys are more important. I know we love tackles, but give the interior guys some love. When you want to be a big physical run team and you have a quarterback that needs to have a clean pocket, losing one of the best guards in the NFL, that's a big stinking deal.
Real quick, preseason player of the week for me goes to Austin Booker. He was a 5th round pick last year out of Kansas, 6'6", 230-ish pounds. The kind of scouting report on him was he's a ball of clay. He's a great athlete. He's nowhere near strong enough. The Bears are going to essentially, who drafted him, are going to have to essentially redshirt him and let him develop. But if he adds weight, there aren't many 6'6" guys that move and bend the way he does. He's added the weight, and there was kind of some buzz in camp that like, hey, maybe Austin Booker could come through and be a guy. 3 sacks in week 1, a PFF rating of over 94. Just really interesting to see a guy who's just supposed to be a raw ball of clay, and he does the work, and you're starting to see him pay some dividends. That was awesome. And also his teammate, Noah Sewell, a former Oregon Duck linebacker, had a few huge goal line stands there against the Dolphins. Really did a nice job. The thing with Noah Sewell has always been he's great coming downhill, right? So those goal line stands are perfect because that's who he is. You get him in space and there's issues, but they were kind of playing in a phone booth in the sense that he came in a couple of different goal line stands and made some big plays. So that Bears front 7 had a couple of young guys show some promise. I think that does it for episode 7 of West Coast Bias. You can subscribe and please leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You can send in questions. We're starting to get people message us about questions. That's sukenemec@gmail.com, or you can hit our Twitter account. That email, sukenemec, is SUKENEMEC@gmail.com. Suke, thanks for joining me for episode 7 of the West Coast Bias. We'll be back later in the week for a lot more football talk.
See you Friday.